Welcome to a special edition of CTV News at 6 as we mark one of the worst air disasters in Canadian history, the 20th anniversary of the Swissair disaster. The jumbo jet was en route to Geneva when it plunged into the cold waters of Nova Scotia shore on September 2nd, 1998. Bill Pickerel was in the control tower that fateful night.
The pilot advised me that they were flying the aircraft manually, which I didn't realize at the time that the autopilot had disconnected. Then in rapid succession, some of the display screens on the instrument panel went dark. The radios failed, the transponder failed. And then at 25 minutes past the hour, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder failed. So after that point, there's no way of knowing what else might have failed in the way of systems or flight controls, or how the pilots might have reacted to it.
229 lives were lost aboard that flight, and some who worked the scene were forever changed. When the plane went down 20 years ago in the dark of night, maritimers rushed to the shore and the vast ocean to search. By land, people parked their cars and shone their lights toward the water, and anyone with a boat headed out with hope, looking for signs of life. It wasn't long before searchers realized there would be no survivors. Thus began the grim recovery of remains. There were no Canadians aboard, but victims from over 20 other nations meant the eyes of the world were watching and waiting for answers. Peggys Cove was turned into a command center and became a home base for the international media that descended on the scene. Offshore, divers who braved the chilly depths of the Atlantic Ocean, searching the ocean floor, would describe it as diving through hell. There was the grim task of then identifying the victims and then piecing together fragments of the plane for answers. The quiet fishing communities along Nova Scotia's South Shore were gravely impacted in the days that followed. Their once peaceful place of beauty, a daily reminder of the tragedy offshore. As family members of victims came to the Maritimes, they were overwhelmed by the locals who opened their hearts and homes to let them be close to the scene of their loss, and together would share the burden of their grief. Now today, as they have year after year, they will gather once again at the Bayswater Memorial, coming together not as strangers as they did some 20 years ago, but as lifelong friends for a service of remembrance and reflection.
The process of recovering from our grief can help us to live more fully and to appreciate each day and each person as an irreplaceable gift. In grieving, we must eventually let go of our attachment to the person who is gone, yet we can keep their love with us.
Through it all, the victims' families and the communities along Nova Scotia's South Shore who had reached out to help them continued their attempt to cope with the tragedy. They threw flowers in the water, picked up the pebbles to take back home, or simply gazed out at the sea.
As we come together 20 years later, let us recognize the contributions of all those who worked to recover the dead, to comfort the families, and to care for the workers, and to find the answers.
We offer this gift in remembrance for all who died. We offer the next gift in remembrance and in recognition for all who searched and worked. We offer this gift in respect for those who suffered and have struggled to rebuild their lives.
Not far from Bayswater, there's another memorial to the Swissair tragedy. Peggys Cove became home base for emergency operations and the world media. CTV's Alan April now with more from that region.
Thanks, Marie. Well, Well, it's certainly not unusual to see huge crowds of tourists out at Peggys Cove on a sunny weekend afternoon. But today, just a short drive away from the iconic lighthouse, people from all over the world came out to pay their respects and remember the victims of that tragic accident that occurred just off the coast here 20 years ago today. Sylvia Laube and her colleague Thomas scheduled their first visit to Canada around today's 20th anniversary of the Swissair Flight 111 crash.
It was very important to me to see the Swissair Memorial and to remember all the people who died 20 years ago. We were very affected in Switzerland because never was such a tragedy in the airline history, and we were very, very sad that so much people has to die.
The jet crashed just 8 kilometers off the coast of the picturesque fishing community of Peggys Cove. This memorial near the site holds a special place in the hearts of many visitors and locals alike, as a place to remember the 229 passengers who died and recognize those who responded to the aftermath.
We often hear stories about the treasures that might be located off sea and things like that, but every time I come here, it's to sit and be with these people who are such a treasure to humanity, who gave so much of themselves. It's an honor to be here on the memorial to remind myself and others of not only the best in Nova Scotia, but the best in what humanity offers. The people that lost their lives here that day, they are the true treasure to me.
Retired Navy officer Gary Dumas was working on the HMCS Ville de Quebec on that fateful night 20 years ago, when he was called to an urgent meeting by the ship's captain.
And he said, we've had a call from the rescue center that a plane has gone down. So, and we were being dispatched over to St. Margaret's Bay here to see what we could do. We were just so naive to it all. We actually had a spot set up for survivors, and we thought, surely there'll be someone. But as we approached the site and we saw what we saw, it was pretty tough.
Fishermen from nearby communities were the first to respond to the horrific scene.
I really feel sorry for all of the people, all the fishermen from the community that went out in their boat all alone in the dead of night with the wind and rain and the fuel, and doing what they had to do to recover the remains of the individuals from the flight.
The heroic acts of those fishermen and other locals continue to be appreciated by Swiss visitors.
The people here were very helpful against Swiss people, and that's the experience I made now on my trip here in Canada.
I spoke a few times with the Swiss ambassador in Ottawa about the crash, and it was nice to respect the people,
A shared respect that continues to be remembered in this community 20 years after that tragic night. Alan April, CTV News, Peggys Cove, Nova Scotia.
And still to come in tonight's broadcast, part 2 of our conversation with Claire Mortimer. Her father and stepmother were victims of Swissair Flight 111, and she renews the message she shared 20 years ago. A warning, in fact, to Maritimers to focus not only on their grief of victims' families, but their own healing. A conversation of reflection and recover later in the broadcast.